started good mechanical order. In other words, there was nothing wrong with it. 6 days later, on the 11th of January, in his same police notebook, he said, radiator hole, engine knocking, engine seized up. So you've got, in the police notebook, first him saying there was nothing wrong with it, and then 6 days later, a hole in the radiator. When this was looked at by the CCRC, Police Constable McQueen, who actually did this examination, said, I don't know why I put that in the police notebook. I must have been having a brainstorm because it's not correct. But I thought that with police notebooks, that's the reason why they have them. And I'm sure in lots of cases the policeman stands in the dock and says, my lord, can I refer to my police notebook? And I just don't understand how the CCRC can accept his story and say, well, there's no evidence. I've been refused to go to the appeal court. At the moment it's going in front of a judicial review. But I've been told that usually judicial reviews just stick up to the same arguments that have gone through various courts. With police notebooks, you mentioned police notebooks before, how can you say that the policeman says now that he's lying? I mean, is there anything we can do about that? Can you sue the policeman for lying in his police notebook?
Well, can I just say that we're not lawyers and we can't give legal advice. I personally don't know if you can sue the police officer for lying in the notebook. I think it's a really important point you make that there is a routine procedure which may not be directly connected with the case, but which relates, like, as you say, a police mechanic routinely examining a vehicle that's brought in to the police pound or whatever it is. And we need to look out for those things because they're not going to be picked up in the case. Well, when did you actually become aware of this police notebook?
After the law lords decision, it wasn't produced in front of the law lords. My mother wrote to the Home Office and she got loads of documents. She just asked, can you send me all the documents you've got about my son's case? And she got 5 documents.
So what date was that?
This was, the law lords was in October 1973.
Right.
My mother wrote in the December and she got all this stuff from the Home Office. And though there had been a lot of disclosures because the police suppressed 164 statements at my trial, though all this evidence was then looked at, Lord Chief Justice Widgery said, yes, it is very strange, all these miners are honest and reliable, but they're all mistaken. And that was it, all gone out of the window. What has just come up is fingerprint evidence. How long do police have to keep fingerprints in a murder case?
There are Home Office guidelines to the 43 forces on how long they keep any documents, but individual forces themselves, with those guidelines in mind, impose their own separate ones. So I can't answer that question clearly, but what I can say to you, that you can write to any police force and ask them what is their policy, their individual policy for that force as to how long they keep. In your case, you're asking about fingerprints, so ask about that specifically. So that's what I advise you to do in order to find that. There's no clear, straight answer to that question.
What it is, I've got a police notebook from the Chief Inspector of the Fingerprints Department, Inspector Sands, who examined the car on the 6th of January, found fingerprints in it, photographed them, lifted them because they were really good fingerprints. But unfortunately, they found out it wasn't the fingerprints of myself, Stafford or Angus Simmons. It was somebody else's fingerprints. And that was never disclosed at all to any appeals or the House of Lords. Now, I've only just found that document. And when we got back in touch with the CCRC, they got in touch with the police and they said we destroyed all the evidence in the Rebecca and Stafford case in 1973. Nothing exists.
Well, you can see that there's a real frustration there and a real problem as to how you can go back to them and you know, say, well, you didn't destroy them in 1973. How can you do such a thing? That's really difficult. What you have illustrated is a long, considerable time after these events, you were still able to uncover some sort of documentation. It hasn't been able to help you as yet. But if people can relate those circumstances to their own cases and see that this non-disclosure issue that you very clearly highlighted is extremely important, and if you've been able to get hold of that evidence at a much earlier stage, it may have been very useful to you indeed.
So we advise everybody in this room, straight after the trial, or before the trial, you really need to try and get as much evidence, especially these notebooks, and various things like that, because otherwise you never know what they're holding, and each stage becomes far worse of trying to get to. I wish all of you the very best of luck.
Thank you very much for that contribution. It's very useful. A thing you can do is write to the police and say, you say, I'm pursuing this, I intend to pursue appeals, etc., and I want you to retain all the evidence in this case. So you have it on a record that that's what you want them to do. So that's another thing that we advise people that they should do. And very often, you'll be looking through your papers or in having communication with the CPS, etc., and you realise that there's some particular document that they simply do not want you to have. That elusive document, that notebook. Well, I always say this, if they don't want you to have it, that's the very document you should be pursuing. It's obvious really, isn't it? In other words, there's something to hide there. Now, can I ask this question?
Sue may want to say something.
Sue, did you want to say something?
I presume you might. Okay, Susan there. I think, if I'm right in thinking that the CCRC has refused to stand on the fact that the evidence isn't, I mean, 100 minutes, you might have mentioned it. CCRC have refused the appeal because evidence isn't available and so they can't challenge it. And surely this is something that we've got to pick up with the CCRC, that, that's not a justifiable reason because of the actual documents you just spoke about relative facts. The CCRC is too good an excuse to reject an appeal because something's been destroyed, the police have destroyed the evidence. This is something maybe that campaign groups could take up with the CCRC and challenge them on that going forward, especially using
That's quite right. As we're saying, you can pursue these documents, you can even obtain these documents, but then if you can really make use of them through the system and through the CCRC, who may well frustrate the use of those documents with a whole list of excuses that to us seem patently ridiculous, we have to change that system. But in the first instance, you must pursue those documents. Now, can I ask, who has heard of the Holmes computer system? They're the only people in the room, there's very few, who've heard of the Holmes computer system. And believe me, that relates to solicitors as well. The number of solicitors still to this day who say, what's that? The Home Office Large and Major Inquiry System. What is that? And what it is, the Yorkshire Ripper case, which we'll all know about, generated so much paperwork and from so many different forces that it engulfed the inquiry. They couldn't cope with it. They couldn't deal with it. And out of that grew the idea that we must get a system in place that can collate that documentation, that can bring that evidence together. And a computer system came out of that, the Holmes computer system, and now it's Holmes 2, might be even Holmes 3 now, an even more sophisticated system. But what it is, it documents every document in that case, and it has to be not the burglary down the street. They don't use it for that. It's for major inquiries, obviously a murder, a rape case, robbery cases, or in complex involved fraud cases. historical abuse cases which could have 100 complainants. Those type of cases, they will use a Holmes computer system. And the good thing about it is that you are entitled to the disclosure of the Holmes computer system and everything that's in it. There's all sorts of things in it. And one of the interesting things in it, and I'll just name this one, is the policy document. The policy document is, I'll put it in these terms, it's a document that's kept by the senior officer in the case, and it is a running event of his thoughts, really, or certainly it includes his thoughts on the case. For example, he may write in it, such and such a person has become a suspect, and I mention that for a reason. And then they go on to treat that person as a witness, and they interview them. And in other words, they don't caution them, as they should do, when that person becomes a suspect. And I only use that one tiny example, but believe you me, the policy document reveals that day-to-day running of the case. Now, police corruption isn't always involved in miscarriage of justice cases, but it does happen. And it would be wrong to say that every case starts out with, let's fit someone up. It doesn't. But what may happen, and this is a typical scenario, a serious event occurs. There is pressure. There is pressure from the Home Office on the Chief Constable to do something about that case. They're not getting anywhere. They're pulling in all sorts of people. Time's going on. They need, as they call it, a result. Then they get someone in. They might arrest that person for all the right reasons. He looks right for this job. But then what happens is, a little bit further down the line, they realise evidence is coming to light. Hang on, don't think we got the right person here. But let's just put that evidence to one side. We'll stick with him. He looks right. And so it goes on. And it becomes corrupt. And then the whole case is geared to convicting that person. And then when that person is convicted, the whole case, everything is geared to proving and showing they were right in the first place. And all that evidence that points away from him, that should have been disclosed anyway, is hidden, destroyed, and goes. That's one way that it happens. So just bear that in mind. So if you go right back to the beginning of that case, when that case was probably being done in all the correct ways, just think of that gold mine of evidence that is there that you're looking for. And when you look at your case files, and you've got that famous group of documents, the unused material, who decides that that material is not going to be used? Well, the prosecution do. And why did they decide that? Because they have the say as to whether that evidence is relevant or not. You don't. The accused person doesn't. Your solicitors don't make that decision whether it's relevant. The CPS have made that decision, and they decide that statement is not relevant. You're not getting it. But it goes into the unused material, and sometimes under some sort of innocuous heading. So your solicitor will get the unused material, a list on the front of what it is, reads it down, nothing appears to be relevant at all about those documents. They will purposely misname a document to hide it. So you have to look at your unused material very, very carefully indeed. And don't just read the list and say that doesn't seem relevant. Read the actual documents that are in that pack of unused material. Anything you want to say, Andrew, or should we open it for questions?
I think we should open it for questions. So I'd like to encourage people to, even if you feel a bit shy or not quite sure how you formulated your question yet, we'll be around all day. You can come and talk to us or other members of Innocent or the London Against Injustice, Kent Against Injustice, Merseyside Against Injustice. There's someone here from Yorkshire Against Injustice. I see Stephen over there. So you can talk to any of us and ask questions. If we can answer them, we'll try. If we can't answer them, then we'll try and point you in the right direction, or we'll at least take down notes of what, especially on the subject of documents, what documents need to be investigated, found, put on our list, that sort of thing. Are we ready? Well, does anyone have any questions? I won't wrap it on.
Can I just ask, if you're between solicitors and you haven't actually found a solicitor to take on an appeal, should you be asking previously perhaps for all the documentation that he's got? Can you ask for all of that?
Kevin spoke about taking control of your case, and even if your intention is just simply to change solicitors, ask another solicitor to handle it, what we would recommend strongly is that you get all the documents, every document possible, off what you no doubt very rightly claim are crap solicitors, copy them and then pass them on to your new solicitors. You take copies. Dottie sitting next to you did that, and she hired a photocopier and did it. Because that's what needed to be done, and I'm glad she did it, because we do have a very full set of documents relating to her son's case. Yeah, so that's what we'd advise. Just go ahead and get them before they lose them in some back room or something. Kevin was advising on.
You write to both the police force concerned and to the CPS of that area that covered the case.
But also, can I just say that even if you get a new solicitor and you're really enthused with him, don't be confident that he's going to spot everything. You do your own job as well. Read everything as well as, even if you've got a brilliant solicitor, push him too, because every good solicitor takes on too many cases, and sometimes will miss something that you will find relevant. So you do the work as well and feed that to the solicitor that you get.
So does that mean that you can go directly yourself? Obviously you have to go through a solicitor. You can't go to the police force or the CPS yourself and say, I want those documents for myself.
Yes, you can write to them, but it has more effect if you go through a solicitor. So if you're in the case where you presently don't have a solicitor, of course, then you do have to take control. First of all, you've got to get the papers. That's what we've just discussed. And you have to get those from your solicitor who has them. Now, they may be reluctant to give them. They often are reluctant to give them. Sometimes it's to do with unpaid bills. But sometimes they just don't want to hand them over. You must insist. And ways of doing that are, you first of all start politely and you write to them and say, can I have the documents? It doesn't happen. Maybe you write a second time. Then you say, I am coming on the 27th of September to collect those documents. And you arrive there. And
Noisy children.
Yeah, you're into noisy children, yeah. And the dog. And just an example of how we'll have heard, of course, of the Johnny Kamara case, where Johnny served 19 years for murder. There was something like 122 undisclosed statements that were found, 12 of which were of absolute relevance and alibied him and were instrumental in winning his appeal. But he then wanted his papers. Actually, these papers were at a barrister's chambers, not a solicitor's. So he had difficulty getting them. So he parked his car across the pavement, telephoned them from his car, locked the car doors and sounded the horn until they came out and filled his car with papers. A bit of an extreme way of going about it, but it was effective. I'm not suggesting, of course, that you do that. I'm just saying you can be creative about that. While we're on the subject, it just came to my mind, obtaining information is what it's about, really, isn't it? That's what you're looking for, to empower you, information. And another way of obtaining it, of course, is by using the Data Protection Act. You can write to you can write to any organisation, can't you, of course, to obtain what you require under the Data Protection Act. And an idea is and I've got an example letter here, so if anyone wants to know how you do that, I have an example letter, and I understand someone's just told me you can get photocopying upstairs. So I've got a few copies, but if we need more, we can get them photocopied. And it's an example letter of what you would write to apply for that information. But again, it's about